Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, I'd like to thank the West End Masjid for inviting me, allowing me to do my book presentation, inshallah ta'ala. Before we begin, I'd like to just give you a short CV of myself. My name is Sheikh Muhammad Jaaber bin Heshaam. I'm the son of Hajj Heshaam Jaaber, the actual person who did the janazah for Hajj Malik Shabazz. My work is in the field of dawah, and I'm also a historian and an author. I published a book called titled "Call Me Muslim," and alhamdulillah, inshallah, it's sold out, but it's going to be available, inshallah, in the near future. Alhamdulillah. This book, I buried Malcolm. You know, some people say you can't judge a book by its cover. But I think that in regards to this book, I think the cover says a lot. And as you can see, it is I Buried Malcolm, the final chapter. Also, the legacy of Hajj Heshaam Jaaber. So the book has two components to it, inshallah ta'ala. And that's what we're going to deal with. And the reason why we were compelled to do a second edition is because we were responding to our sister, Dr. Betty Shabazz, and her cry, when are the Muslims going to claim Malcolm? The liberals claim Malcolm. The black nationalists claim Malcolm. When will the Muslims claim Malcolm? And we know that a Muslim has a right over another Muslim. And it is upon the Muslims, the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to protect the integrity of our dear brother Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, and to take him out of the category where they have frozen him or stagnated him as a black nationalist, a Pan-Africanist, a hate monger, anti-American, anti-white, a separatist, when we know that Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz made that transition, that he discarded all of those negative connotations that were attached to him, and also the theology in which he was perpetrating prior to his accepting of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is one of the reasons why we felt compelled to actually do a second edition. Now, this is my quote. Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz's life is more than just another American story, embellished in literary myth by the pen of authors who have the power to manipulate and reconstruct the narrative for the sake of international appeal. And that is what has been, happening over the time, that everyone and anyone feel that they have the right to pick up a pen and try to articulate the life of Hajj Malik Shabazz. Okay, and we wanted the life of Malcolm to be projected through the lens of a Muslim, because we know that by him carrying the title Al-Hajj, it's an element that supersedes the mind. It is an element that takes its place and its firmness in the heart, because he bear witness that there's none worthy to be worshipped but Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his messenger and final prophet. So those who say they love Malcolm but have stopped short of the Shahada have to really rethink, their position. The first edition of the book was written in 1992. And as you can recall, it was the Malcolm Mania hype. Spike Lee, 40 Acres and a Mule, decided to produce a film called X. Okay, and in that process, my family were a part of that team, what we call correspondent team that analyzing the life of Malcolm, working, hands-on with Spike Lee to make sure that Malcolm was properly represented in every aspect of his transition. But as time progressed and as they began to outline the screenplay, they began to move the Muslims away from that process. And if you watch the movie, you saw that they emphasized more of his life of Jahiliyyah, crime, and all these other aspects, and they did not actually highlight his Islam and what does that actually mean. So my father, when he got the results of the movie, agreeing with his sister Ella Collins, Malcolm's sister, she said it was symbolism that lacked substance. So my father felt, upon me encouraging him to actually write what you know about Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, to record what you know and how your relationship with him, and from every aspect. So he began to write the book I Buried Malcolm. What has happened is that now through the revival of, we have some form of civil activism going on now, Black Lives Matter, and all of these issues. So people are reaching back into the 60s, and they're grabbing symbolisms and symbols and personalities and using it as mascots. T-shirts and on billboards and murals and walls and signs and things like that. Yet they fall short of the Shahada. There are about 50 different books that has been written about the life of Hajj Malik Shabazz. And if any has been written by Muslims, when I say Muslims that are trained formally to understand the proper tenets of Islam, to understand his transitions and his confessions and so forth and so on, and be able to give the society or the public the true image of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. So we decided to reproduce the book and add a couple more chapters. Okay. As you can see, the second edition, which I contributed to 2 bonus chapters. One is the legacy of Al-Hajj Heshaam Jaaber, which is my father, and also the Malcolm I Buried. The reason why we chose the title, the Malcolm I Buried, because as we know, when you're talking about Malcolm, you may be talking about Malcolm Little. You may be talking about Malcolm X, or you may be talking about Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, because Malcolm reinvented himself more than one time. So we wanted the public to be clear as to which Malcolm Al-Hajj Heshaam Jaaber buried. And not only that, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, his life ended at the gates of Islam, at the very threshold. And there were Muslims that had preceded him that was already involved in the dawah, that had already established masjids and institutions and so forth. However, the public had very limited information about that. Very limited information about that. So the misconception is that Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz could not find Islam domestically, the Sunni Islam. So his Islam came from abroad. So we wanted to actually do something on the legacy of Al-Hajj Heshaam Jaaber, the man who actually performed the janazah, and that is also a part of the book. This is the first cover of the book. This is the first one my father wrote. You can see on the screen. That's the first cover. It's about 117, 18 pages. This is the second edition. It's about 250 odd pages. It is supported with pictorial appendixes, footnotes, a glossary, so forth and so on. And it has more content added to it. Why do we choose to change the cover? If you look at the first edition, you will see that he's at the gravesite. That is the end. That's the death and the interment of his life. But also you can see non-Muslims around my father. So you cannot really, or you're not sure whether Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz is being buried as a Muslim, just from this photo. It could just be someone who has, who want to show their respects and so forth and so on. So we thought it was necessary to go to the very beginning as a janazah starts with the takbir. So that's why we switched the cover. That was the reason for that. Because we know from here, it is a signature and a validation that the man in which Al-Hajj Heshaam Jaaber is praying over is a Muslim. Because we know that if Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz had fallen short of the Shahada, then it would have been impermissible for my father to pray over him. Now, this is the back cover. Now you see him standing at the gravesite. Okay, he's standing at the gravesite, which is appropriate. And on the back, there are two quotes that we abstracted from the book from my father, where he said, where the Muslim world had been silent, we had been out and organized. Where all had succumbed to fear and threats, we affirmed our faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the world to witness. Why did my father say that? Because upon the assassination of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, the shock was so dynamic, and he was such a profound, prolific personality, not only domestic but also international. And he had many circles of evil around him. So people were afraid, literally afraid to come close to him. You know, and this is why my father said that, and we're going to actually talk about that a little more. People just shattered, and they got absent. They became absent and missing, and no one would answer their phones. And on the bottom of that, my father said, history has recorded my participation at the janazah of Hajj Malik, but few in history have ever reported or known that we were members of the oldest indigenous Sunni Muslim community in North America, raised and touched by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the soil of the United States. And that is a fact. In fact, I did a interview this morning, on a TV interview this morning, about I Buried Malcolm, the edition. And the person who interviewed me said that he was under the impression that it was a person from Sudan that had performed the janazah. And I was shocked. I was surprised that at this point in time, I'm talking about Muslims are not aware of the person that actually performed the janazah. So that's why my father wanted to make it clear, because as time progressed, people was asking who was the person who did the janazah for Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. Now, that institution that my father was speaking of is called the Adinu Allahi Universal Arabic Association. Okay, we call it the AAUAA, Adinu Allahi Jama'iyat al-Arabiyyat al-Ummiyya in Arabic, and it was founded and chartered, okay, in 1936 by the late Sheikh Professor Muhammad Izzuddin. Okay, as you can see him sitting there wearing the black traditional Islamic cloak. Okay, that's Sheikh Muhammad Izzuddin, yarhamullah. Now, very few people have ever heard the name. Okay, and when I say it was it was chartered in 1936. Okay, now today we can go online and we can get an EIN number, a nonprofit, and we just send our bylaws in, our articles of incorporation, and you get a certificate to operate with a 501(c)(3). But in the 20s and 30s, when you submitted, an application for a chartered organization, you had to be very discreet. You had to be very clear as to what you was establishing. So when I say it was chartered, that means they went through all of the legal processes that qualified them to have an Islamic organization in 1936. As you can see there in the Arabian Regala, Professor Muhammad Izzuddin is sitting in the front, and this is actually what we call our annual assembly. And this is taking place in Hamilton, New Jersey, on the Ezzeddine Village. Okay, we had an actual village that the township had actually credited with the name Ezzeddine Village. And Professor Ezzeddine, as I mentioned, he actually acquired his Islamic training from Al Azhar. Okay, now you have Jamiul Al Azhar and you have Jamiatul Al Azhar. You have the University of Al Azhar, and you have the masjid itself. That if anyone has ever traveled to Al Azhar in the traditional school there, you will find that they are, I don't know if they're in operation now, but around in the courtyards there are various classrooms, you know, that teach Islamic sciences like fiqh, Arabiya, Quran, Hadith, Tafsir, and so forth. So Professor Ezzeddine Yarmallah, he actually acquired his education from there. Now, why is it that this information did not reach the public? Yeah, I could take a show of hands. How many have heard of Muhammad Ezzeddine? Raise your hands. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Here you see, this is a copy of an FBI file. In 1942, J. Edgar Hoover, of course, was in charge. And we have in our possession 617 pages of declassified FBI files on this organization. Infiltration, interrogation, fear tactics, and so forth. They tried to actually limit its growth and its exposure. So when you see Al-Hajj Heshaam Jaaber bearing Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, they would want you to think that it is someone from Mali or Sudan, okay, in your back door or your backyard, and seeing someone who looked like you, who have went through the same social and cultural experience that you went through, but yet has a complete or a correct understanding of Islam. So here we have 617 declassified FBI files. So that is one reason why the information has been restricted. Okay. Alhamdulillah, we have two testimonials in the book. One of them is from Dr. Ilyas Shabazz, the actual daughter of Malcolm. She, you know, I'm not going to go through the text itself, but she acknowledged, you know, and appreciated the support that my father gave to her family, her father, her mother as well. My brother, Imam Ali, was her mutawaf during the pilgrimage. He took her to Hajj, as my father accompanied Betty on her second pilgrimage to Mecca as well. So she was very appreciative. Sheikh Omar Suleiman, you probably know him. He's internet celeb, mashallah. He's did a lot of work on Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. Now he actually have come into a real community that actually have a real connection with that legacy. So he's actually have thrown in the mantle. When my brother Imam Ali did the janazah for Malika Shabazz, this is some of his comments, that we would continue to do the prayers and the funerals for the Shabazz family. And that is, as you can see, that is our community from Elizabeth. I'm the person on the front in the black abaya, carrying that coffin along with other members from the Elizabeth and Newark community. And we're representing a community. It's not that the personalities that are there that are significant. It's about the community itself coming out to actually give our sister her rights. Now, as we know, the narratives of any situation is always distorted. We look at the exterior of a person and some of the challenges that they may not can overcome, and we draw our judgment and our perception from that. I can say that when Bahia, Betty Shabazz, may Allah have mercy on her and give her paradise and forgive her for her shortcomings, when she was burned, 90% of her body through her grandson who accidentally set the house on fire, she requested my father to come to the hospital, and he would lead her in the salah, the prayer, and she could only follow him using her index finger. For many years, my father had supported the Shabazz family. Ella Collins, annually she would have a commemoration in Boston for Hajj Malik Shabazz. And as Muslims, we don't do an annual commemoration. I mean, we abstract the good from anyone who gives us good in our lives and help the progress of Islam. But it's not in our traditions to have to immortalize a person to things of this nature. And I asked my father concerning that. I asked my father, why is it that every year, sometimes he would take us, and when my brother Imam Ali would go, he would actually sleep in Malcolm's bed, in the house of Ella Collins. And I asked him, why do you do this? And he said that I only do this so that the libators, the black nationalists, the Pan-Africanists would not misrepresent Malcolm. And I'm saying this in the context of him being a Muslim. I'm not being disrespectful to other systems and so forth. I'm just saying, as a Muslim, he has rights. And my father would champion that every year to make sure that when he had an opportunity to speak about Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, he would talk about his Islam. And when his wife Betty passed away, it was a very, very trying task, challenging task to actually make sure she was buried as a Muslim. People just see we coming out of the 92nd Street Masjid, carrying her to the hearse and, on to the cemetery. But it wasn't that simple, because as you know, she has been submerged in the civil rights culture, working in those avenues. And of course, when you're among people for so long, they feel they have rights over you. They feel they have rights over you. And what happened was they wanted to actually pray over her, allow the Muslims to pray over her. In fact, they didn't want anyone domestic to pray over her. They wanted someone foreign, because it's, and we know why. But anyway, so my father sent me to the masjid in New York to talk to the imam there, Sheikh Agua. He was an Egyptian at that time. And I went to him and I delivered the message. My father said, she was one of the daughters of the struggle, etc. It would be very, very appropriate for someone, who can actually identify, with that climate to actually, represent, her janazah and so forth. However, there was some, politics in that. And at the end of the janazah, they wanted to take her, actually, believe it or not, to the Abyssinian Baptist Church and do a memorial for her. And I have to commemorate and thank our sister Aisha Adawiya. She fought with the Shabazz family because Maya Angelou, she was saying that, she was a Christian before she was a Muslim, and we need to also acknowledge her Christian roots, subhanallah. So after the janazah was over, they tried to remove us from the masjid. The security came and said, we want you to leave because the family wants to mourn their mother. And that was a strategy so they could snatch the coffin and take it to the church. And of course, we were in place. We did not allow that to happen. And we actually took the coffin, put it in the hearse, and we took it to the cemetery, Ferncliff, and we actually made sure that she was buried as a Muslim. Okay? And, and of course we were up against all the celebrities and all of these types of people, but we were standing firm on La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and that it's a right that a Muslim holds over another Muslim. Ittiba' Jannah is that they follow the procession of the funeral and make sure she's buried as a Muslim. And there's no shirk, there's no paganism, there's no libations, there's no polytheism added to her departure, mashallah. So that's what happened there. And here you see Malika Shabazz Janaza, and of course my brother Imam Ali is the one who prayed over her. Now let us go back and look at the call. We're talking about February 21st, 1965, 3 o'clock on, around 3:30, 3:45, my father received a phone call. And they told him that Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz has been assassinated. And we know it was a public execution. It was a public execution. It was a strong message that went out. And of course he said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we come and to Allah we shall return. This is what we say, in times of affliction, when someone returns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course they were very adamant about when are we going to claim the body, because what a lot of people weren't aware of Malcolm's Islam, because it was so short-lived, his Islam, and we'll talk about that. But my father and the Muslims, like Sheikh Dawud Faisal, Yarahmullah, and the pioneers, they knew Malcolm had made that transition. Okay, because you can't carry the title Al-Hajj and not be a Muslim. Okay, you can't carry that title. In fact, you will find a lot of the pioneers carrying that title today. Hajj Karam, Hajj Wali Akram, Hajj Heshaam Jaaber, Hajj Talib, Muhammad Talib, and so forth and so on. So we find that because it was a validation that you were an Orthodox Sunni Muslim. Okay, because there was all types of Sunni Muslim groups. People had labels. We had the Morishan Temple, we had the NOI, we had the Ahmadiyyas, we had all of these different groups labeled Islam. But when time came for you to actually go to Hajj, you had to go through the Hajj courts if there was some suspicion about your Islam. Okay, and alhamdulillah, my father and those who were in that entourage knew him to be a Muslim, because Malcolm, even before he publicly denounced his resignation or resigned from the Nation of Islam, he was secretly meeting, okay, with the Sunni Muslims, in the late hours of the night. He would go to 72nd Street and he would have sessions, and there was a transitional team there, so forth. So they knew him to be a Muslim, and my father replied, I'm on my way. And what happened is, of course, there was up in arms, because they knew that it was a violent situation, and it wasn't something that you would go in, being a humble lamb. So they was prepared to meet whatever, the situation would be. And they went to New York, St. Mark's, at the Ansar house with Hajj Hassan. Okay, they went in his basement and they met about how they was going to go about claiming the body. Okay. And of course, the threats was coming. Anyone who come near Malcolm is going to get the same fate that Malcolm got. You would suffer the same consequences. This was the threats. Of course, we knew that organization to play for keeps. It wasn't something you roll off like it was just a bullying. Okay, we knew they was playing for keeps, and of course, they were prepared for that. So my father, he went to the police department, and of course the police knew they were armed. However, they did not make an issue of that, because they weren't willing to protect them anyway, as they weren't willing to protect Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. So everything was a standoff, and all the way up to the janazah. They were prepared for the worst case scenario, and that was the call. Now, the original chapters of the book was the straight path. The second was the Muslim, the third, the Hajj, the fourth, the martyr, and the fifth, the traditions. And the reason why my father put these chapters in the book, because he just didn't want to write about doing another autobiography of Malcolm. He wanted to educate the people about what is Islam. So when they get to the Shaheed or the martyrdom of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, they would understand the route in which he took. You cannot ascertain the martyrdom from Malcolm if you read Alex Haley, okay? Because he stopped short of the Shahada. Alex Haley himself was a Republican, he was a conservative, and he had opposing views, even though he was a journalist. He did not agree with the information. In fact, even the conversations and the information he was abstracting from Malcolm, he shared that with law enforcement. Okay, so it wasn't a private situation. Okay, Doubleday, the publishing company who had actually agreed to publish the book while Malcolm was living, they reneged on it upon his death. Okay, so he had to find another publisher. Also, there were other chapters that never reached the book because the book wasn't published until after the death of Malcolm. So it was in Alex Haley's hand to decide what parts of the book would be published and which part of the books would be concealed. So that was an issue with that. Now, in the bonus chapter, it's very important that we understand why the book, the chapter, the Malcolm I Barrett was inserted. As I mentioned earlier, you know, to say Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, you go online, you see him in video clips. You don't know at what stage in his development. At one day you listen to Malcolm with a beard. The next day you listen to him with his face shaved. You know, one day he's talking about Allah, and the next day he's talking about the white man and the devil. So this is how people get their information about Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, going through video clip. And of course, you know, what happened is that, you know, I don't know if anyone here could relate to, I'm sure the climate, you know, if you're from urban America, you can. The riots, you know, the racial tension and so forth and so on. So there was an angry outcry at that time, you know, and again, you know, and Malcolm was angry, you know, and I don't think he was angry enough if you really, really understood what was going on, you know, in the society. And his anger actually was reactionary. It was a reflection. He was mirroring the oppression and the injustice that we as a people was experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, so that was the outcry. So I inserted the bonus chapter, the Malcolm I Buried. And one thing I wanted to make sure that the people understood, that Malcolm took the Shahada. As you can see, that is his Shahada. When he decided to go to make the pilgrimage, okay, you know, it's one thing to say you're a Muslim, but to actually go, you know, beyond your own community, your own borders, and enter into, you know, the sacred precincts of Mecca, you have to have some validation. So the Islamic Center of New York was one of those satellites that could vouch for your Islam. And of course, Malcolm had classes. He had prep classes, you know, what is Islam? So, you know, he was a Muslim. So he took the Shahada. If you can look at the Shahada certificate, it is dated April 8th, 1964. Malcolm was assassinated February 21st, 1965, which means that he was upon the Shahada for less than a year. Less than a year. And he spent about 6 months of that time traveling through Africa. Okay? So he had very little time to come back and let the people know, okay, that he had denounced the theology of the Nation of Islam. So people were still under the impression it was the same Malcolm, okay? And I tell you, you know, Malcolm was a thorn in our side, you know. I mean, he was very profound, he was very charismatic, he was very convincing, and he could capture an audience. And he was actually a thorn in the side of the Sunni Muslims. You know, we just wanted Malcolm to go away, you know. really we wanted him to come over. You know, my father would always say we were just waiting for him to come over, just waiting for him to come over. But he did take the Shahada. Okay. Now, when Malcolm went to Mecca, and this is, I don't want to get there yet. He went to Mecca. He was intercepted by the authorities there. He just didn't get off the plane in Jeddah and with ihram on and run into like we do today, you know. No, he was intercepted. Why? Because they had a concern. Was he really a Muslim? So he had to go through the Hajj courts. You know, we don't have to go through that now. You know, we should start going back through that because people are slipping through the cracks. Okay. Okay. People are slipping through the cracks. However, he went through the Hajj courts. And when Malcolm took Shahada, okay, and these are his own confessions, he had not totally denounced the theology of the Nation of Islam. When he set up the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, it was only a separate institution, but they still was actually advocating the same theology. When he set up the OAU, the Organization for Afro-American Unity, that was a political platform that was actually based on Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism, so forth and so on. So he was actually in Mecca before he made that actual conversion, when he reached his epiphany. And he said, it was at that point that he had to make a decision whether he was going to denounce the theology of the Nation of Islam, okay, and follow the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It was at that point, okay, and of course that's Usman Ahmed Usman. He was a young Sudanese student, and he was doing a what we call a nuzha or casual walk down the street one day in Harlem, and it just happened to look up and hear people and going into I think it's temple number 7, and he just went up inside, and of course, Muslim, Salaam Alaikum. Of course, him coming from Sudan as a youngster, he assumed that was a masjid. So when he went in, he encountered Malcolm preaching, and Malcolm was on the theory of the white man is the devil. And this young gentleman at 22 stood up and challenged Malcolm right there and said, no, you're misunderstanding. And Malcolm debated him about the verse in the Quran, about the blue-eyed and so forth. However, Uthman challenged Malcolm on that, and he actually spoke at his janazah. He did a eulogy. You didn't see it in the movies. Okay, he spoke before Isaac Davis, but they cut that part out. Okay, they cut it out because they didn't want the public to know that Malcolm was a Muslim. Okay, now, and this is his sister Ella Collins. She's also in the book. Actually, Malcolm recruited her into the Nation of Islam. She left before he did. She took her Shahada and she tried to bring him out. Yes, and she supported him. She paid for his pilgrimage, and she also paid for his janazah. And she opened up Islamic school, and they have honored her at the Islamic Center in Boston, the Ella Collins Center in Boston. She was a champion, and she fought very hard to keep his legacy alive. And she took over the Muslim Mosque Incorporated and also the OAU upon his demise. And she was the one who distributed 21 scholarships that they had, that the Rabat al-Alim Islamiyya had given them, and also the scholarship that had come from Al-Azhar. Okay, now, this is Elijah Muhammad's son, Akbar Muhammad, Dr. Akbar Muhammad, okay, the youngest son, who acquired his scholarship at Al-Azhar. Okay, he defected early. Okay, and when Hajj Malik Shabazz was under fire, when it was all heated up, he contacted Akbar and said, go public. And Akbar called a press conference December 1964 in Cairo. denouncing, the creed and the theology of the Nation of Islam. Okay, and showing his support for Malcolm, and also encouraging his brother Imam Wadidi Muhammad to abandon that theology. And these was actually the children. Also, again, Hajj Malik Shabazz. How many of you have seen any of these pictures of beyond King Faisal? Actually, he was Prince Faisal at that time. Okay, he didn't become the king until November of 1964. Okay, now this is a rare photo, because what happened was, once they took Malcolm from the plane and he went to the Hajj courts, they found out who he was. Oh, this is the man in America that's causing all the problems. So Prince Faisal's son went to meet Malcolm, and he became the guest of Prince Faisal. Now, this is in 1964. Prince Faisal is the one who abolished slavery in Saudi Arabia in 1962. That's right. I didn't say 1862, 1962. That there were people that were held in bondage. Even though it wasn't chattel Jim Crow slavery, but still, you were controlled. Your freedom to move to and fro, and your person was controlled. And it was an illegal institution, and he was the one who abolished it. Okay. As you can see on the bottom picture there, that is Sheikh Ahmed Hassoun. He was from Sudan. He taught in Mecca for 33 years. He was the one that was assigned to Malcolm to teach him, to come back and train him how to be an imam for his newly founded community, his organization. And of course, we have here Malcolm himself. He visited the Chief of Justice in the Gaza. He actually went to the Palestinian refugee camps. Okay, and you'll find some of that. All of this is in the book. I'm just giving you an outline. And at the bottom right, you will see him receiving his ijazah from Al-Azhar, to giving him certification to go back and teach Islam, meaning that his aqidah, his beliefs, and so forth was correct. And the first recipient, this is Sheikh Ahmed Tawfiq from MIB, the Muslim International Brotherhood in Harlem. He was the first recipient of the Malcolm X scholarships, and he went to Azhar. And what happened was, when Malcolm was assassinated, he came back, and he was under the impression that he would be the Imam of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. And we think that he should have been, based on that situation. However, it didn't happen. Malcolm wrote a letter, and I'm using the term Malcolm and Hajj Shabazz, interchangeably, because this is in the narrative, and so that you won't be confused. We know that eventually we're gonna deal with Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz in that light. But anyway, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, he wrote a letter when he was in Hajj, and one of the statements he made in that letter is that you will be surprised, hearing this come from me. Okay, about his change of mind and attitude and his outlook. Why did he say that? Why was that so significant? As I mentioned earlier, he had left with the theology of the Nation of Islam. So the people, or the members of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, was under the impression that he was going to come back the same way. But when he changed, they felt they had lost their leader. They had lost that nationalist, that Pan-Africanist. And a lot of them defected from the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and they went back and rejoined the Nation of Islam. And now who was going to be the leader, because if you look at those members of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, the OAU, you will find none of them that rose to prominence out of that. You find them recycling back into the Nation of Islam and going through the 1976 transition to Imam Wadidi Muhammad accepting the Shahada. So Ella Collins was left you know, you know, with all the responsibility. And she didn't have anyone to take the lead. So my father, James Small, anyone familiar with James Small? Raise your hand. Yes. So my father told her to appoint him because he wasn't with Malcolm. You know, he wasn't involved in the politics, and he was a member of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. So he was under the impression this would be someone who's neutral, you know, and it would be less conflicting. However, as we see, he actually left, you know, that, and he abandoned the teachings of Islam and so forth and so on. Oh, so my father said it was a bad choice. Okay. But anyway, so Imam Tawfiq was the first recipient of that. And also, you see my father here talking to two members from the Dar. The Dar was a outgrowth of State Street Masjid, okay, from Sheikh Dawood Masjid. They established it in Brooklyn, and this is in the 60s, you know, in the 60s. Now here you see this picture here is Hajj Malik Shabazz, and that person on the left is, of course, Sheikh Dawood Faisal, and they're at the United Nations Plaza, and he would always try to invite Malcolm into Islam. Okay, every time they would have an encounter, he would invite Malcolm to Islam. So to say that there were no Muslims around, okay, is an understatement. It's unfair. It's unjust. Okay, and also you see here in the picture here, you have, this is a committee meeting with leadership in New York. It's like a little what we call seminar, and in the very center you see Sheikh Muhammad. You see Dr. Abdul Rauf. He was the director of the Islamic Center in Washington, D.C. And to his right, that's Imam Shawarabi. He was the director of the Islamic Center in New York. And at the far right, the second from the person sitting on the corner is Sheikh Dawood Faisal. And the gentleman sitting beside Rauf is Hajj Hassan. As I mentioned, they were the ones who he used his house to organize to claim the body of Malcolm. And of course, the sister standing in the back with the white on is our mother Khadija, who was very supportive and instrumental in supporting Sheikh Dawood. I mean, they opened their house up, they converted it to a masjid and a school, mashallah. And the standing at the right of her, that's Saudia Mausuda. She was the one who actually organized Islamic Press International. My father worked for that organization, that press, for about 15 years, mashallah. And there are various personalities in that picture that were pioneers with Islam. Now, take a look at this picture here. This is mind baffling. You know, you see on the left, you see Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz in a Western suit. Okay, and he was in that suit for 4 days. Why? Because, as I mentioned, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated had not been trained. Their members had not been trained to properly prepare, wash, shroud, and scent, and prepare a Muslim for a funeral. And they actually didn't know how to deal with that. Okay, and the threats was so intense that people were afraid to come forward. Now you see him on the right. It was Sheikh Ahmed Hassoun, the brother from Sudan, the Sheikh who actually took the Western suit off him, washed him, gave him the ritual, the ghusl, shrouded him, scented him, and turned him over to my father because he feared reprisal. He had just come to America. He had no recourse, and he was definitely not going on the front line. In fact, he was at the Audubon Ballroom the day in which Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz was assassinated. Okay, he was there that day. So that was a challenging task as well, to get Hajj Malik Shabazz out of the Western suit and into the Islamic garb, because they wanted to bury him as a black nationalist. Everyone wanted to pull on him. They definitely didn't want him to go down as a Muslim. Okay, now Al-Hajj Heshaam Jaaber. The next bonus chapter is Al-Hajj Heshaam Jaaber. Now, as you can see this is the Jet magazine. And of course, they highlighted both pictures. but they didn't give an explanation. Okay, they cared not to give an explanation. And you see, my father is standing right there in the middle making the prayer, but they did not mention his name. Okay, they didn't mention his name. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, when Malcolm was assassinated, Sheikh Heshaam was there. But there's a unique person that's on the stage there. It was a Japanese lady named Yuri Kochiyama. Yuri Kochiyama was Japanese. She was the only person of non-color that was a member of the OAAU. And she took her Shahada in 1975. It was her family that was interred during World War II. She was Japanese and they was put in those camps. And she came out an activist. Okay, and a lot of people have problems with her coming into the OAU because it's supposed to have been for only blacks. Okay, people of African descent. People who had went through the social struggle for justice in America, but she was an exception to the rule. Okay, and she tells her story about what happened that day during the assassination, and she was there on the stage. She got out of her seat from the audience. She went on the stage and she was screaming, "Malcolm, you cannot die. Malcolm, you cannot die." That's how connected she was with him. And again, you see in the middle there, that's my father standing, and you see Yuri standing in the far, and his sister Ella Collins standing on the right, and they're going to his grave to make dua and to make sure that the libators and those people who are actually have their own agenda do not dominate the situation. And this is my father sitting with Aisha Adawiya. As I mentioned, she is the one who actually fought for our sister Betty to have a janazah. Okay. Now in 1968, 65, 66, 67, anyone here from New York, Detroit, any of those areas? Mashallah, we know about the riots, man, the burning down. It was crazy. People were losing their lives. It was an angry time in America. Okay. And we know in 1968, the assassination of Dr. King, it escalated. However, when it came to Elizabeth, it was the mayor was Thomas Dunn. Okay, Thomas Dunn. And he had given the troops and the police force orders, shoot to kill. Okay, for looters and all types of insubordinate behavior, shoot to kill. So my father, along with other Muslims in that community, negotiated some terms. They said we will be the peacekeepers. We will actually cartel this bloodbath. So he took a bullhorn and got in the car, and they rode through the street saying, "No, this is not the way we solve our problem. This is not the way we solve. It's going to be a loss of life and so forth and so on." And he cited in the current report the National Advisor Commission for Civil Disorders as the peacekeeper, and he stood between the tanks, literally between the tanks, flanked with National Guards and the rioters to stop a bloodbath that particular day. Leroy Jones, Amir Barak, I know my father gave Amir Barak and his wife their shahada in his living room on South Park in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And he used to teach, my father used to teach Islamic studies at the Spirit House in Newark. And they were actually two of the students, mashallah. And his son, Ras Barak, is the mayor, believe it or not, of Newark today. And Amir Barak was definitely a social activist. And of course, we know his history. Leroy Jones, he was a poet, and kill Whitey, things of that nature. We have some excerpts in the book about his position on social justice. And again, we have on the right here, my father he's just did the janazah for Zayd Shakur. That's Saladin Shakur's son, Lumumba Shakur, Afeni Shakur. This is where Tupac Shakur comes out of. That his mother was married to Lumumba, and of course, Tupac was born inside of a jail cell. Anyway, just showing you that connection, of the relationship of my father being in the eye of the storm for social justice. And, Zayd Shakur lost his life in a gun battle with state troopers on the New Jersey Turnpike. And my father actually did his janazah. And here you see him as he's working for the Rabita al-Islamiyya. You have a couple of the directors there. And this is 1971. On the right, we are standing in front of the United Nations Plaza, saying Palestine, Palestine for the Palestinian people. They were throwing bricks at us, not rocks, but actually bricks. Just showing you that when you see Islam in its totality, then wherever your brothers and sisters are, they're struggling for social justice, it is a right that they hold over the Muslims, that we have to give them support and so forth. And on the left here, you see my father. He's in South Africa in 1987. He gave over 200 shahadas to the Zulu nation, and they built 7 masjids there, mashallah. That was his work outside of the country. He interviewed over 100 heads of states and political personalities in the Middle East and Africa and so forth. He actually went to Randers Islands when Mandela was incarcerated there, and so forth and so on. So we wanted to kind of like add to the book that chapter so that people will be able to identify the person who actually did that janazah, the risk he took with his life and family and so forth and so on. And again, he started up his own Islamic Dawah network called Mecca Communication, mashallah. And lo and behold, you see my father in 1985. He's actually one of the advisors for Muslims who came over. And Minister Louis Farrakhan was actually in that entourage at that time in 1985. We probably the only family to have that caption because, as Khalif, in 1985, you couldn't be caught with a camera nowhere in Mecca. Okay. But being that he was with Islamic Press International, he was given a pass and he was able to, that's actually a video. We actually did a freeze frame on that. And that's actually Farrakhan actually in Mecca at that time. Okay. And also we have here the Banu Sakr, which was one of our sister organizations. It was the Latino Muslim organization that my father organized and instructed them and so forth. And, we know that there's no division, La Arabi, La Fadl Arabi ala Ajami wa Ajma al Arabi. There's no preference of one person over another, but in their development, it was best that they had their own autonomy, they could reach, the Latino community, without any type of, resistance. It was like, transparent. So my father educated and trained them in Islam so they could go out and give dawah. MashaAllah, they've grown. They're up and running. Masjids, they're doing conferences. They're in the thousands now from that effort. And again, my father also established or facilitated overseas institutions. As you see in the middle there, that's the Jihad Institute. We operated in Morocco from 1997 to 2003. We lost our concession during the hostile, what we call the war on terror. All foreign institutions had to be suspended. So we had to come back and dismantle the institution there. And again, that's when I was in the cadet at the Jihad Institute, mashallah. Amadou Diallo, Ahmed Diallo, the Senegalese that was killed. I'm sorry, from the Guinea. He was killed by police in New York. That's his father and mother, Seiko Diallo and Khadija Diallo. We supported their legal fund by doing fundraisers in our city, Elizabeth. And you can see my father's there with the mayor of Elizabeth. That's not Mayor Dunn, and that's a Bowish, a whole different personality. And Al Sharpton, all the people came out to try to help get their legal funds, and they actually won. This is Jumaat Capitol Hill. Of course, who doesn't know Imam Siraj Wahaj? We were classmates in 1978. That was his training at Naperville in the Saudi as well. He also was our imam at the DNC, the Democratic National Convention in 2012 in Charlotte, North Carolina, mashallah. And that is the book, okay? We try to make it available for the public so that we can remove any misinformation, false narratives about Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. I think we have maybe, we actually have about 10 minutes. I think that I'm supposed to conclude it at 7:30. So if there's any questions at this point, I'll take them. If I miss anything, I need to go over anything, I'll try to revisit that, inshallah. Yes.
Okay, I want to know from your perspective, what's our fascination with, not our here, we keep calling him Malcolm X, over calling him
I think that as Muslims, we understand the difference, you know, but what happened is that Hajj Malik Shabazz himself said, I'm going to be Malcolm as long as my people are in the condition they're in, because we don't want to reintroduce him as a total stranger. You know, if they can actually see how he reinvented himself. And I think that eventually, as you know, as time go on, you know, as youth get, you know, because a lot of people don't even know that he's Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, and they don't know the significance of that name and why it is Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. It's not like he just named himself that Al-Hajj is a title, and he took the name Malik or Malik from a brother by the name of, from Sudan, named Malik al-Badri. When he went to Sudan in the 50s, he met this brother named Malik al-Badri. And when he went to Beirut, okay, he ran into him again. And he said, and he found out where he was residing at. And he said, he said, who is this? He said, my name is Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. And he recognized the voice. He said, oh, you took my name. So he took that name to kind of like, honor that person in Sudan. But yes, I think that it's just a matter of clarity. Like I said, we didn't want to create confusion as though they're two different persons, but it's two different experiences. So, but if we can actually get people to understand the experience that brought about the Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, then we can actually discard the name Malcolm X. Yes.
What do you think is possibly more of a reason for that could led to his assassination? Was it the lawsuit that he was trying to do against the United Nations, or his transition into Muslim Incorporated, and now his new Islamic spin on things? Like, what do you think could have been the main thing that they wanted to get him for?
Well, you know, I always say it's not who killed Malcolm, but why they killed Malcolm and who wanted him dead. You know, why Malcolm was killed and why did they want him dead. You know, every organization that developed in America, right? It didn't matter whether they weren't looking at Malcolm in the beginning in his Islam. You know, we go back to Marcus Garvey. You know, there was surveillance on Marcus Garvey. You know, there was FBI surveillance and infiltration on that organization. The Moorish Science Temple, we have FBI files on that. I just mentioned the Adinullah Universal Arabic Association with 617 declassified pages on that. The Panthers, they were FBI files on that. Every organization that was challenging the powers to be, okay, they were a surveillance on them. But what happened is that in the case of Hajj Malik Shabazz, he lost the protection. You know, for those people who wanted him dead, for example, I look at it this way. Malcolm was preaching on the soapbox for 10 years. He taught black nationalism, separation, you know, not segregation, but separation of races and groups. Pan-Africanism. He, in his first presentation, he was anti-American. He was anti-white. They didn't touch him. Okay. Now he became a Muslim, and he traveled to Muslim countries. Okay. Not only, see, Malcolm had the potential to transform the nation of Islam. He had the potential to actually carry the United States. Let me put this on. Hold it in my hand? Yeah. Okay, like I was doing? Yeah. Okay, bismillah. In order to take the United States or any sovereign nation to trial, you have to do it through the United Nations. And if you don't have a sovereign nation, you have to ask another nation to give you their platform. So that's why Malcolm went to Egypt. That's why he went to Tanzania. That's why he went to Ghana. He was trying to find allies so that he could actually get into the United Nations to condemn and convict America for human rights violation. That became an international threat. Okay. He had accepted Islam, the Sunni Islam. He had taken the Shahada. So Malcolm actually built the Nation of Islam. He started the Muhammad Speaks. I mean, he created a protocol, the order, and they went from a few thousand to hundreds of thousands. So he was a domestic threat as well, okay, and possibly an international threat. And also the infrastructure in which he had resigned from was very concerned about how damaging that would be. There are other factors that go along with that. So there was about 4 rings of evil around him. And as you notice, on the day of his assassination, there was very few police out there, and only one person died that day. We never thought about that. You have an organization and your leader is gunned down in your presence, and only one person died. And if you look at the stage, you have more women on the stage just screaming and crying for him than you have men. So, this is, that's another area, but, again, like I said, it's not who killed Malcolm, it's why Malcolm was killed and who wanted him dead. And you got to go through his life and his travels and see, and there was more than one interest group for his demise, inshallah. Yes.
Just to add to that point, excuse me. Well, first of all, let me say we appreciate all the hard work you've done.
Thank you.
As well as along carrying on the legacy of your father. And we actually launch and reward you for that.
Amen.
For coming and sharing it with us. To that point that you're just making, Jaaber Hoover was reported to have quoted that the thing that he feared most for America was not the invasion from a foreign power, but the black man, or African American, embracing true Islam. That was Jaaber Hoover's quote.
Yes.
That was a statement I want to make. But the question I want to ask, you had mentioned that everyone was under the impression that the person that led Malcolm's janaza was from Sudan, when in actuality was your father.
Yes.
Could it be that because the brother who from Sudan had actually done the washing and the shrouding of the body, could that have been the reason why people thought that it was him that also that led to Salah?
No, because Alex Haley himself mentioned my father by name and by where he lived, and it's just that they didn't want to follow up. We have to, there's another presentation I have. It's called 500 Years of Islam in America. And when we're dealing with Hajj Malik Shabazz, we're starting in the middle of the movie. Okay, forensically, you have to go back to the very beginning and source, because as a historian, I've read American history books, 4,800 pages of American history that's in the school system and colleges. They never mention one Muslim. Okay. So from the very beginning, onset, that Islam has been banned. And every slave narrative, okay, that was written, I'm not talking about African American born slaves. I'm talking about those who came from the continent. They wrote it in Arabic and they were Muslims. The very first narratives. So they know who we are. That 3 or 4 out of every person in the slave colony was a Muslim. So they made sure that would never come back. And I can agree with you that they would not, because now you have allies, and Africa at one point was 75% Muslim. Yes. Inshallah. Yes. Imam, just pull the mic whenever you want to. I know. Okay, inshallah. Okay. All right, bismillah. Yeah.
Aside from the shortcomings in his full misrepresentation, one thing that the autobiography of Malcolm X was able to accomplish was a lot of shahada and a lot of movement. So I know you said in this book, one thing that it accomplishes is showing Islam. Do you think it will have the same effect?
Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada ma kunna linahtadi lawla an hadana Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides Muslims. Okay. And Allah guides the Muslim, and whatever avenue that they come through, Allah has decreed that. You have people who was in armor, who traveled to Afghanistan and Iraq and to fight Muslims, who fought Muslims. And they come back Muslim. So Malcolm got their attention, okay? And I'm not saying that the book was not a benefit, but what I'm saying is that when you get into Islam, begin to understand Islam, sometimes people cannot reach the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because they're stuck within the Malcolm mania. You see, Malcolm joined 1.8 billion Muslims. Okay, if you go back, as I mentioned, the Adinullah Universal Arabic Association, my father was the Imam of the Muslim, of a large group of Muslims. That was the leader of the Muslims. Malcolm was the leader of the Black nationalists and the Pan-Africanists. But in Malcolm's own words, he said that when I started teaching Black nationalism, I knew the people wouldn't follow me. And when I became a Sunni Muslim, I also knew the people wouldn't follow me. What he means by that, sometimes we look at the quantity and not the quality. So a lot of people would go to the Audubon Ballroom in crowds, but they weren't really willing to make that sacrifice. You see? So when Malcolm was assassinated, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated crumbled. There was no one who continued to pick up the mantle to elevate that process. So the people that was around him, they, Allah knows best, but we know what is apparent. They wasn't as sincere as they were. That's why Malcolm was actually alone in many cases. And I'm saying this because I'm 67 years old, and I've encountered a lot of the people that was actually in his organization. In fact, I did the memorial for his bodyguard, Benjamin Kareem. Okay. So I know the people and I know what happened, what transpired on the inside. So I'm saying this to say that, yes, the book, Alex Haley, and even the movie X brought people attention, but we can't stop there. Okay. Because they will misrepresent Malcolm. They will still look at Islam. And there's a spin to this, because what happened is, if we project Islam as an ethnic religion, then it's going to, a lot of times, especially when you talk to uneducated Americans, they think Islam is just for Black people. are third world people. They don't know nothing about the Ottoman Empire. They don't know anything about the Bosnian, the people that's in Russia. You know, they don't know anything about the European Muslims and things of that nature. And you got to go back historically to the messenger nation laws where there was segregation even with the immigrants coming over because they had to declassify themselves as Arabs or whatever they were, and they had to go under the classification of whites. So that same legislation that governed, you know, segregation, it also applied to them. So that's why you saw that huge gap between the immigrant Muslims and the indigenous Muslims. But yeah, I'm not saying that Alex Haley book did not help Muslims, but again, I don't think that he could articulate Hajj Malik Shabazz as a Muslim. Yes.
Did you come in contact with the brother Pinto? Because I know he had advised Malcolm about taking his fight.
No, I never came in contact with him. Yeah.
I heard things where he was also assassinated.
Wow. You know, one thing that we have to, you know, when we look at, you know, Malcolm told Imam Wazir Muhammad, he said, you know, I can no longer see these two organizations as being permanent because now I'm a Sunni Muslim. He was talking about the OAU and also the Muslims Incorporated because there were elements inside of that were anti-Islamic. You see, so there was an evolution there, and he was changing. But if you don't know where he changed, then you're going to think that this is what he died upon. And that's very crucial if we can get people to see him as a Muslim. And, you know, because he saw within Islam had all it was the solution. He said it himself that if America could perhaps, you know, accept Islam, then the racial problem would go away. You know, hypothetically, we know that racism is not inside of the deen, it's inside of the people. So a person who's living up to his commitment and conviction cannot advocate asabiya, racism. You can't do that. But that is the paradigm. That is what we reach for as human beings. We know that we are created weak and vulnerable. And sometimes we don't understand that a person has to match his experience. And Islam may take a different motion. You know, the Aqidah and the beliefs are protected, but the application may vary from society to society, circumstances to circumstances. And I think that sometimes we don't understand the plight that's going on in the Middle East, the Far East, etc., as they don't understand our struggles right here. So we have to come together and rectify that, inshallah. So we can take one more question. And I'm going to ask a question, and this is the trivia here. Who was the first Hajj in America?
Who was the first one?
The first Haji in America.
You mentioned it.
Say it again?
You mentioned it first.
Not yet.
I thought you mentioned it first.
Say it again? You talking about Wali Akram? He made Hajj in 1957, but Hajj Hassan made it in 1952. Okay. You know, this is Omar Saeed. he had made Hajj before. Yes, a slave. Yes, he came from Futu Jalon. Yeah. But you know, Wali Akram was actually an Ahmadiyya until 1944. Okay, when they had the United Islamic Society in Philadelphia, and Professor Azim Muhammad was a part of that, and it was Nasir Ahmed from the International Brotherhood, and it was also Sheikh Dawud Faisal. That Wali Akram, the first mosque of Cleveland, was actually under the persuasion of the Ahmadiyya theology, and after he met Sheikh Azzuddin, he actually changed his philosophy, his theology to the correct aqidah, mashallah. Yeah, go ahead, Father.
You said that Malcolm did not fully take the Shahada from you. How was he able to get through the Hajj?
Okay, I said that he wasn't fully convinced. He actually verbally took the Shahada, you know, in New York. and he passed the litmus test when he went through the Hajj courts. They're going to ask you a series of questions, about your Aqidah. You believe in Allah, and they're going to ask you a few questions. Believe in Muhammad, which Muhammad? Where was he born? Where was he buried? What Quran? Because, Durali had the circle 7. You understand what I'm saying? So they want to make sure that your Aqidah was correct. What's your position on Al-Masih? If you said Ghulam Ahmed, then they're going to put you on the plane. You understand? So Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz had enough Islamic training. There's a lot of people who understand Islam, but it hasn't yet reached their hearts. And he himself, in his own words, said he was undecided. He was undecided. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that changed his heart. Because he didn't have any, ambition about being that kind of Muslim. But when he got there, he had an epiphany. I don't know, you're not old enough to know Jim Crow South. I can recall drinking from a water fountain that said colors only. I went to segregated schools in the South, going to the top of the theater to watch the movie and receiving the food from the window of the restaurants. So Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz was not drinking from the same fountain, but from the same vessel, sleeping on the same mat, where we have to have a green book to find out where we're going to sleep in the South. So that impacted him. He saw the profundity of Islam. And it was then that he wrote the letter and said, you're going to be surprised to hear this coming from me. So that's what happened with that. Yes. Oh, yeah, there's a verse that says, when the desert Arabs came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, we believe. And, and we can, Iman is a matter of the heart. And the Prophet ﷺ did not from his own self say, you're not believers. Allah had to reveal to him that they weren't yet at the level of Iman, and go back and tell them, don't say that you believe, just say you have surrendered, because faith has not yet entered into your heart. So we have a lot of people that say they believe, and sometimes you think you believe till Allah give you the test. You say, oh no, I didn't know it had to go this far. I thought it was a social club. These is my frat brothers, but when you have to make certain sacrifices for Allah, and yourself and your family and things like that, your Iman is tested. That's why Allah said, you think you're just going to walk into heaven, without being tested. No, you're going to be tested tremendously. And Hajj Malik Shabazz was tested. And he had refuge. Malcolm was given refuge by Ethiopia. They said, you can come here and you can get out of the line of fire. Saudi Arabia said, you can come here. We'll protect you. We make you the guest of the king. And the American Ghanaian community also gave him refuge. But he chose to stand on his Islam to make that statement. And I think, and Allah knows best, that his death, right, was so impactful, as you mentioned, that people began to come into Islam. Because he made the ultimate sacrifice. 4 children and his wife pregnant with 2. He had about $125 in his savings. He didn't own a home. Subhanallah. MashaAllah.
We also want to mention the last message, which was recorded a week before he was assassinated. That if you haven't heard that, he verifies a lot of what the Sheikh has said. The last message. If you don't have a copy, I have it on MP.
Alhamdulillah. And we also have him actually saying the kalima in Arabic. So inshallah, so and this is what the book is for. The book is to create funds for the documentary. So this is just one step to the next step. Yes, brother. Alaikum salam.
I have another question I was going to ask, but I came late, so I'm not sure. Did you mention about Dr. Betty Shabazz, the situation you had with her burial as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Dr. Khalil Abdul Rashid, who's the Islamic chaplain at Harvard University, he was able to recover Malcolm's speeches in the library at Harvard University. and he goes into depth. You see where his viewpoints on the Islamic community worldwide, of course, African Americans and our fight and what we need to do here. It's really interesting because you do see his iman in his statements. He actually talked about it the last Black Islamic convention we had, conference we had here in Atlanta. But he's another person to contact with. He's from Atlanta, in fact.
Okay, inshallah. Have you read the book, Revolution by the Book? Show of hands. Who read the book, Revolution by the Book? Raise your hand. MashaAllah. You know, when I read that book, it came out in 1994, 2 years after my father wrote his book. Okay. And what I saw in that book, because, you know, our Imam also was on the front line as a social justice activist, you know, the Black Power struggle. But you see that how Islam, in that book, it is actually relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the guidance. You know, it's, you know, if you read the book, Revolution by the Book, you wouldn't know that he had any prior associations in that. So that's what we was looking as Malcolm was developing. You know, this is how you develop. And, you know, a lot of times I meet Muslims who were previous members of the Nation of Islam or from the Moorish Science Temple, the Ahmadiyya, and they have no remnants of that in their Aqidah. That they have really made that full transition, and that in understanding the correct what we call Aqidah of Tawheed and the Risala of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and have that tawakkul, that, you know, that actual trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, who actually believes and they are convinced that Allah speaks the truth and what he's promised will come to pass. I mean, that is the thing that I think that people have mentioned about Hajj Malik Shabazz, that they still have not been able to see his reliance, his tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, I still think they're mixing apples with oranges when they write about his life, as opposed to looking at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the direction in which he's going, and that is the maturity of a Muslim. To worship Allah as though you see him, but if you can't see him, know that he see you. MashaAllah.